blind one came on a Tuesday, which I remember because Tuesday was the day Director Huss ran his weekly count, and I was not supposed to be there. He had told me the week prior, in the measured tone men use when they want you to feel grateful for the dismissal, that the camp's kitchen rotation was being restructured for efficiency. I was 63. I moved slowly. Shh. The new volunteers were younger, and the supply lines from Orthen province were tighter than they'd been in 2 years. He needed people who could keep pace. I understood. He shook my hand. I showed up Wednesday anyway, and Thursday. I came in before the morning count. 4 Huss arrived, and I lit the burners and started the grain mash, and nobody stopped me because the grain mash was hot and ready, and the line of 700 displaced people waiting outside the canvas wall didn't particularly care who had made it. So I was there on Tuesday when she pushed through the eastern perimeter fence. She was enormous. That was the first thing. The sheer scale of her. The way she had to lower her head to pass under the fence cable. The slow, deliberate placement of each foot, as though the ground might betray her. Scales were slate charcoal, darkened further by dried mud caked in the joints between plates. One wing was folded tight. The other sat at a slightly wrong angle. Not broken, I thought, but wary. And her eyes, both of them, were filmed over white, pupils gone gray and flat. She turned her head left then right, reading the air with her nostrils. She was blind, completely. And she was starving. I know what starving looks like. I had been feeding starving people for 4 years at that camp, the sunken line along the jaw, the way the ribs press questions through the skin. She had it. I did not think about whether this was wise. That is the honest account. I took the ladle from the grain mash pot, filled a wide tin basin we used for soaking dried provisions, and I walked out through the tent flap, and I set the basin on the ground 12 feet in front of her. She heard the basin land. Head came up and swung toward me, and I will admit that for 3 full seconds I reconsidered. She was easily 4 times my height at the shoulder. Her claws left clean gouges in the frozen mud. I said, "It's food, it's warm. Come forward about 10 steps. She came 9, close enough. She lowered her head and she ate. That was day 1. Huss found out by day 3. I don't know who told him. One of the new volunteers, probably. Someone who thought they were being responsible. He came to me at the end of the morning shift while I was washing the basin she'd eaten from, and he told me, in language that was still measured but no longer warm, that I was harboring a dangerous animal on humanitarian grounds, that the camp's insurance charter did not cover draconic incursion, and that if she hurt someone, the liability would fall on the camp authority. I asked him if she had hurt anyone. He said that wasn't the point. I asked him what the point was. He reassigned my tent to a family of 6 from the eastern lowlands, which was fair, and told me my pre-dawn kitchen access was revoked, was less fair, but also unenforceable, since I had a copy of the supply depot key that dated back to the previous director. I slept in the depot that night on a folded tarpaulin. It was cold. I did not die. By day 5 I had learned her signals. She made a low sound, almost subsonic, when she needed to change direction. A kind of resonance in the chest I felt more than heard. She'd stop when I spoke and follow, when I walked ahead and made noise with my boots. I started wearing the tin ladle, clipped to my belt so she'd have something to track. She was not the camp's problem. She was simply a creature that could not see, and was doing her best. I found out on day 7 what she was. One of the camp's elder residents, a man named Torval, who had come down from the Dresch Range as a boy, and still wore the mountain accent like a coat. He saw me walking her along the perimeter wire in the early light, and he went very still. I asked him what he knew. To me, he said, the Dresch Conclave had been sending searchers for nearly a year. A female of the bloodline had gone missing after a boundary dispute with a rival range. Blinded in the conflict, the Conclave had assumed she was dead. I thought about that while I walked her back to the depot. I had been feeding the air to the Dresch Conclave out of a tin basin I also used for soaking lentils. I did not tell Huss. I did not know what the Conclave was or what they might do. I knew she was eating and navigating, and that her scales had begun to clear of the caked mud. I knew she had started sleeping near the depot wall, her wings stretched at an angle that suggested the wariness was easing. I kept walking her at dawn and feeding her at sunrise and talking to her in the plain way I talk to everyone, which is without ceremony and without the assumption that they understand every word, but with the further assumption that tone carries when language doesn't. On day 9, she pressed her snout briefly against my shoulder. I stood still and let her. They came on the morning of day 11. I was at the burners when Torval appeared in the tent doorway, his face carrying an expression I had not seen on him before. On a man of 70-some years is significant. He said only, "They're here." I followed him out. There were 7 of them, ranged along the slope above the camp, just below the tree line, and they were nothing like her. They were ancient in the way that mountains are ancient. Something in the density of them. The way they held perfectly still despite their size. The dark iridescence of their scales catching the early light. The one at the center was larger than the rest. Where the others were dark, she was the color of deep water over slate, and she held her head at an angle that was not aggressive but absolute. The eldest. I became aware that Director Huss was standing behind me. He had come out of his office at some point and was now, to his credit, not saying anything. The blind one heard them before. I saw them move. She raised her head from the depot wall and made the low chest sound, and then a different sound, higher, briefly, like a question. One of the 7 on the slope answered in kind, and she took 3 steps toward the fence, then stopped. I walked to her, unclipped the tin ladle from my belt, and I tapped it once against the fence post, which was the signal we had worked out for. "The path is clear. Forward." She followed me to the gap in the wire. The eldest descended then, not quickly, not with ceremony. She came down the slope, the way any creature comes to something it has been searching a long time for. Carefully, not wanting to break the fragile fact of it. She stopped in front of the blind one. They were still for a long moment. Then the eldest turned her head and looked directly at me. I am not a person given to the word sacred. I have run kitchen lines for 4 years in cold and mud, and I have a practical relationship with the world. But there is no other word for what passed in that look. She knew, not from Torval's account, or from any report her searchers had made. She knew in the way that something vast and old knows a small true thing when it is standing right in front of it. She lowered her head, not to the camp, not to the fence or the depot or any of it to me. I stood there with a tin ladle in my hand and I let her. Behind me, Huss said nothing, which was the most respectful thing he had done in the time I had known him. The eldest held the bow for what felt like a long time, but was probably 10 seconds. When she raised her head again, there was something settled in her expression that had not been there before. She turned back to the blind one, made a low sound, and the blind one followed her up the slope. The other 6 fell in around them. In 4 minutes they were above the tree line and then gone. I went back inside and finished the grain mash. The line opened at 7 as it always did. 712 people came through that morning. I ladled grain mash into bowls, and I said good morning to each one, and by midday my back, as it always does, and I was glad of it. Torval found me at the end of the shift. He said the conclave did not bow to things that did not matter. I told him I was aware of that. I rinsed the ladle and hung it back on its hook. I still have it, the ladle. It hangs in my kitchen at home, and it is dented on the handle from 11 days of being clipped to my belt and tapped against fence posts in the cold. Dark, and that is enough for me. That is the whole of it. Some things you do because they need doing. It turns out that is sufficient reason. It turns out someone was always watching, and what they saw was enough.